And then he goes on to say, I've seen the burden God has laid on men. You see, this does not catch God by surprise. God knows the struggle that we have as men. It says that God laid the burden on us. Come on, John. God laid that burden on us. He didn't leave us to ourselves. It wasn't Satan. It wasn't karma. God did that. John's here today. Some of you know who John Prahl is and some of you don't. John is a close personal friend of mine, and he's a close personal friend of this church. John is the general contractor who built this building. Wow. Verse 12. Verse 12, I know there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. John has been a model of this verse for me for years. For years. Had the utmost respect for him because he is a person who lives happy and does good. And last year, in the middle of this project, in the middle of doing good, a season of his life came to a very abrupt stop and start. And so, in just a few minutes, I want to ask John about that season. I want John to share with you about that season. So what I know of John is he's this man. We were out here on a Thursday, and he was parked right by the surrender flagpole in his truck. He had been feeling poorly. I'd left. I'd already gone. We'd been together for a couple days. And he was here and in a meeting at that point on Thursday morning. Is that right? So, John, tell us what happened in the next 24, 36 hours.
Thank you, Don. And am I on? It didn't sound like
Yeah, I'll do it. You're good.
Okay, there you can hear me. I can hear myself even. Basically, as Don said, I got very sick overnight in a hotel room, and I've not been a sick person in my life. I spent 3 days in the first 65 years of my life in the hospital, 2 of those for an appendectomy, and never been sick, never had a problem, hardworking, committed, happy in life. And I got sick, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew I was sick. In the middle of the night, I went to the CVS drugstore here and bought a leave and took everything I could take to try to make myself feel better, and didn't get better the next morning. Came out here, and I had to meet with one subcontractor which was my goal for that day, that I needed to put the push on because he wasn't keeping up the pace with the rest of them. Anyhow, I met with him and headed for the airport as fast as I could get there, drove myself to the airport, checked in to rent a car, checked in, got an earlier flight home, got to my doctor in Lakeland, Florida that afternoon, and he sent me home thinking that I had kidney stones because that's what showed up on the x-ray that they had taken. My son came over when I got home that night, came over and sat with me till my wife got home, and I kept getting worse, and my son called the doctor, who at that time was home and lives right across the street from me. He came over me, and a half hour later, I was on the way to the hospital in an ambulance, and my wife got there with me and prayed for me all night long, and she kept thinking it was more than kidney stones too. And the next morning, they told her at 7:30 the next morning that I probably they would know within 12 to 24 hours if I was going to live or die, that I had a bad poisoning. They didn't know what it was, but it was bad, and I went into a coma within 30 minutes of that conversation, and it got worse from that, Don.
He's right here. 24 hours later, he's in a coma. Is there anything that you could have done to prevent that season of life?
No. In fact, I was living in a great season of my life at that time. I had the strongest relationship I'd ever had with God, and that had went on for about 30 years of my life. Like many of you, I was baptized at a young age. Can't say that when I went through my young adult life that I lived every day the way I should have. Wasn't thanking God every day. Got the feeling that it was all about me. It wasn't about God. And after basically losing a wife and both parents and two brothers and a sister in a 10-year period, I found that I definitely needed to improve that relationship with God again. And I'd prayed every day, but I hadn't thanked Him. I started thanking Him, and life got better and better. And I thank God my wife will be in the next service again. She's been here the previous three. He brought a new wife into my life 15 years ago, and life has been better than I ever dreamed, and our relationship with God has been great. I got stronger in building churches because I felt that's what I needed to be building instead of auto dealerships and office building, and it's been fun. And this is a prime example, and I can tell you that I get no better feeling than going to new churches we have built. Anyhow, the next day I was in a coma. I was then in a coma for 3 weeks. 2 days after I went into a coma, they told my wife I was dying. I had to have, my heartbeat was down, my heart ejection rate was down to 10%. They told her when most people get below 20, they die. They said there was a special pump called an Impella pump that only been available for a short while, was the only thing that would save me, and the hospital didn't have one, but the manufacturer's rep who had to be there when it was installed had it. My doctor emailed the guy who happened to be about to get out of the car and go into church with his wife. He left his family at church, headed for the hospital, was there 30 minutes later. They got me on the Impella, which I was on for 3 days. It did save my life, pumped 12,000 liters of blood through me in 3 days. When they took it off, my heart kept beating. And that was a miracle. The other thing that I will tell you is it's a good sign that when God intervenes that morning, the guy that had to be there to install it brought the pump with him. Told my wife after I was back into MICU that God told him that morning, for the first time he ever did it, God told him to wear his scrubs to church that morning. And he was prepared. When he got there with the pump, he walked right straight into the operating room where they had me opened up and ready for him. And it happened, and it happened. If it had been an hour later, the doctor said I would have been gone.
It's an amazing thing. I've had the benefit of knowing John and being a part of his life and seeing his generosity and his commitment to his church and to the church in general. And you know, he's built over 40-something churches. And so, you know, when this happened, you know, I called you guys. You were my first call, right? And every time, multiple times, you got an urgent prayer request. Pray for our general contractor. Pray for our, and it was desperate. It was desperate. And no one ever gave up. And his doctors never gave up. And it was a difficult season. It was an incredibly difficult season for his wife. And he's here today. He's here today after literally 7 miracles of life through that moment, through that season. 7, I'm telling you, miracles. There's no way this man should be on this stage today before you, but he is because of acts of God. We got to believe that. John, today I flew down to see you when you woke up, and I saw firsthand the condition your hands and feet were in. Would you share with them just a little bit about that?
What I found out when I woke up 3 weeks later from that coma, and I thought it was the next day, I thought I just woke up from going to sleep the night before, and that's when I was told that I had been through 4 major surgeries at that point, and my wife had been told, and family had been told, all the kids were there, had been told three other times that I was dying. Once when I bled out, which I didn't know what that meant, and bled out meant I lost 23 pints of blood in a matter of 2 or 3 hours. They restored the blood. 3 days later, my body filled up with liquid poison, over 50 pounds of it in one day, and they said I looked like a doughboy for 3 days until they could get it all out of my body. But when I woke up and the doctors told me I had sepsis poisoning, I didn't know what it meant. A couple weeks later, looked it up on the website, and I wondered why the doctors kept saying, "You're a miracle to be here." Well, I didn't know what I'd been through in those 3 weeks. But what I learned was that 2/3 of the people that get the disease, to the degree I had it, die immediately, and I didn't die. They told my wife that I would be in a rehabilitation center after 3 months in a hospital. I'd go to rehabilitation for 9 months, and then I would start the process of learning to walk again, without feet and hands. And when I woke up, what I didn't know, because I couldn't raise my head for over a week, when I first raised my head and saw my feet, they were black from the ankles down, looked like I'd stepped in oil. And my hands were the same way up to here. Well, 2 months after I came out of a coma, then I went into the amputation phase, and they took off one foot, half of the other foot, and the ends of all my fingers. Well, what I will tell you, because God did intervene, and as my friends say, God had a plan for me to build more churches. I'm here today 9.5 months after I went into coma, and I am walking, I'm building churches, and I'm enjoying life again. So that's a miracle.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm telling you, his outlook on life hasn't changed. If anything, it's more tenacious. He's been all over the country with me, and he's going and going and going, right? He builds churches not to get into heaven. The only thing that will get him there is his relationship with Jesus, and he knows that. There's no way that we can overlook a season of life like that.